Well before I was paying attention as a kid to what was going on in church, I believe that they used to separate Palm Sunday and Passion Sunday. Perhaps some who are a little bit older than me might remember that being the case. But somebody in their infinite wisdom decided we needed to jam them all together into one Sunday. Part of me thinks it's because they were afraid nobody would show up on Thursday or Friday. They might miss the rest of the story. And certainly, this is one of those days in the church where we go from one extreme to the other rather fast. We gathered in the parish hall and celebrated Blessing of Palms, had a nice procession in, but by the end of that procession, the mood changes rapidly. And suddenly we find ourselves caught up in the story of the Passion. And it is, we know, a very powerful story because all four Gospels make sure that we get to hear it. All of them get most of the characters the same. For the gist of it, the story pretty much goes from Last Supper to the garden to Pilate, maybe over to Herod for a little bit, and on to the cross. But each Gospel has a little bit of a different twist to it. Matthew and Mark, of course, have Jesus from the cross saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? John doesn't seem to believe Jesus is feeling any pain. He just is telling one disciple, take care of my mom. Mom, this is now who you'll be hanging out with. And sees it all as a silly plan to which bigger things are coming. But Luke, who happens to be probably my favorite of the Gospels, has some very interesting pieces that are unique to him. And those are what I'd like to talk a little bit about this morning, because I think they add to the drama and are really kind of easy to connect to. How many of you in your own life have felt like things were going smoothly and all of a sudden they just spun helplessly out of control rapidly, and you had no idea how to make it stop? That seems to me that what Passion Sunday is showing us, how quickly things can deteriorate. We say at first it starts with what seemed to be a nice supper, and of course we hear the words of the Eucharist being instituted at that point. This is my body, this is my blood, share it. And then all of a sudden Jesus makes an announcement that throws a little chaos into the dinner party. One of you is going to betray me. And I think if most of us were sitting at that table, we'd get in a little panic mode ourselves. Who, me? And as most of us do, when the conversation gets a little uncomfortable, what do? Change it rapidly to something much more interesting, like who does Jesus love more, who's going to have more power, but we really don't want to deal with the who's going to do that awful thing. Now, Jesus reminds them of how good things were when they were walking together. You didn't have to worry about money, you didn't have to worry about food, but things are about to change, folks, and you're going to have to start worrying about that. As a matter of fact, you might want to bring some swords along. And as the disciples usually do, they miss the point. But they notice that they do happen to have two swords, to which Jesus really doesn't want them focusing on that, and says, it's enough. Then we get into the garden. And again, the crowd goes nuts, and in that chaos, somebody gets violent, and an ear gets chopped off. And Luke, though, the good physician that he is, makes sure that even in that chaotic moment, Jesus takes the time to heal that person. How many times in our own life, if something has gotten a little too chaotic, and we're feeling a little too much pain, does something just calm it down even for a brief second? That healing touch of the presence of Christ, even in the midst of chaos. Then a little further on, we get, of course, the great denial scene of Peter. Peter sitting there, of course, he was going to deny him 3 times and said, not me. And we know sometimes a cock crows twice. There's a tongue twister. But this time, you're only going to hear it once. And the hardest thing of all is, again, only in Luke, when it happens, Jesus looks Peter at Peter. Have you ever had that happen to you, where you've messed up so hugely, and somebody to whom you did not wish to hurt that way just gives you a look and makes eye contact, and you go, oh no. have a feeling most of us can relate a little bit to Peter on that kind of a feeling. That goes a little further. We find that Pilate and Herod, who hate each other, thanks to Jesus, are now friends. Not in a positive way, of course, because they've just really treated him rather harshly, but was able to bridge a gap among enemies. Then a little further along, though, comes the part of me that I love in Luke the most. If you've ever been to a 7 Last Words of Christ sermon, you know this is probably one of the greater ones. The one criminal who, like most of us, if we're in a chaos and wanting somebody to help us, says, we can do something about this. But the other one sits there and stands there on the cross and says, game over. I've got something more important. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. How many of us would love to believe, and do believe, that when our time comes to join Jesus in his kingdom, we'll have something to be remembered for? Not a little list of all the things we've done wrong, but perhaps the good things that we did on this earth. The times when, in fact, because of what Christ did for us on the cross, we are willing to go into the service of others. Not hoping to get into the kingdom, but hoping that that's what Jesus would remember about us. And the greatest sentence that Jesus says to that guy, today you will be with me in paradise. Not some trumpet sound a long time later, but the right then and there. When both of their earthly pilgrimages end, they go up together. As we head into Holy Week, I hope you will come to those Thursday and Friday story services and dive a little deeper into the story. I hope also that during the week you'll take time to ask, what am I doing this week and with the rest of my life to be remembered when he comes into his kingdom and I join him there? Those are the things that all Christians should be asking. How are we there with Christ in his suffering? How are we to share in his resurrection? Amen. Amen.